Democrat. You represent a district from Brooklyn, and you are not somebody who voted with this plan yesterday that was passed by the Republicans in Congress. But you did sit down with two other congressmen and pen a letter that 168 of your colleagues, I think in total, have signed off on that you sent to the president. What was the gist of that letter?
Well, the gist of the letter is that we're prepared to govern, to sit down with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle in the House, the Senate, and eventually, of course, the president, to negotiate a bipartisan spending agreement that deals with the priorities of the American people, not just in red states or blue states, not just for people on the left or on the right, but for everyday Americans. And this temporary spending agreement that was passed in the House last night is just another example of irresponsible governance, failing to meet the full priorities of the American people simply to meet a political agenda or to do what you think is palpable to the right-wing Freedom Caucus of the House Republicans here in the Congress, and that is not a sufficient way to govern.
Congressman, those of us who sit outside the Beltway have watched this play out for years at this point, where budgets are never put together in time. They are never approved in time, that there is this piecemeal kind of pay-as-you-go, a month at a time sort of situation. And frankly, to most of us, it just looks as if this is partisan politics on play at both sides, all of the time. When you start talking about what really matters to the people who are the average Americans, what are you talking about? What are those issues? Is this really a situation where you can't take politics out of the mix?
Well, in our view, for instance, in this temporary spending agreement, there was a failure to fund safety net hospitals, which are of particular importance to the poor, the sick, and the afflicted who may not necessarily have private insurance and rely on safety net hospitals in order to meet their or their family's needs when they face an urgent health care crisis. That was missing. This particular spending bill failed to fully fund community health centers, which are also an important entry point for people, working families, moderate income folks who are struggling, who may be faced with sudden sickness and affliction. That was not dealt with. The Children's Health Insurance Program, which should have been permanently reauthorized, was just reauthorized for a few years. Again, not a serious effort to deal with a program that's important to the American people. We've seen wildfires and hurricanes afflict people in Texas, Florida, the Caribbean, in terms of the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, as well as, of course, out in California, and most recently mudslides. There was no effort to provide assistance to those people as well. That's why this was inadequate. Those
are all valid budgetary issues. The main issue we hear, though, is DACA, the deferred access for those children who were brought here. And while that is an issue that tends to find bipartisan support, it is not a budget issue. Is that something that you think should be wrapped up in the budget negotiations?
Well, I think as we laid out, it's an issue that we need to deal with as a Congress. Whether it's resolved in the specific context of the spending agreement is up for negotiation. But it is a priority. The president triggered this DACA crisis. There's significant agreement across party lines within the country, and even to some degree within the Congress, that we need to provide a permanent resolution of the Dreamer situation. These are young people who were brought here involuntarily and who essentially have contributed as best they can to the great country that we all have and should be given United States citizenship. And there's bipartisan legislation to support that effort that has been put forward that would pass the House and the Senate if it's given a vote. For political reasons, that hasn't occurred, and that's